I had lived in that red brick cottage outside Bath for 40 years. The roses in my garden had names. The oak at the fence held the carved initials, my. Husband and I promised each other, with when the world still felt simple. At 68, my life had become a steady rhythm. Church on Sundays, a newspaper across the kitchen table, my granddaughter's laughter in the lane. I liked the soft predictability. I liked being known. Then Daniel and Claire Carter moved in next door. They came bearing lemon-drizzled cakes and 2 bright smiles. They noticed the garden first, the bench, the oak, the tidy strip of grass at the boundary, and they noticed it as people notice things they want. Claire asked casually about wills. Daniel asked too precisely about property lines. It felt wrong, but who goes from friendliness to theft overnight? People are nosy. People ask awkward questions. I smiled like a good neighbor and kept my kettle warm. A politely worded letter arrived a week later. Not from them, but from a solicitor. It stated, with all the patient arrogance of printed letterhead, that a small strip of land at my hedge legally belonged to the Carters. We're open to a cooperative resolution, it said. Of course they were open. Open to buying, open to bullying, open to cheap, shameful tricks. That strip of land wasn't a map coordinate. It was the place where my husband taught our granddaughter how to climb, where I'd planted roses after he died, where the bench remembered his hands. The letter made my chest seize. I read and reread every line, as if the words would change when I looked harder. I thought, they must be mad. They must have misread a plan or a registry. Then, in a quiet, determined voice I hardly recognized, I decided I would not simply sign away memory because someone in a new suit had decided they liked my view. So I did what anyone hurt by a polite theft would do. I began to look. The land registry was clunky, slow, but it was stubbornly factual. Title since 1979, mine in black and white. The Carter's application was stamped a month ago. A survey plan, neat and official looking, sliced my roses in 2. They had started the war with a pen. I would start with my eyes open. I slept badly that night. The lemon drizzle cake a taunt on my sideboard. Dawn felt thin and wrong. I put on my husband's old scarf and walked. The boundary as if I were reading the lines of a map I had thought I knew by heart. The oak's bark was rough under my fingers. The bench had the groove where his pocket knife had nicked it. Those small human things anchored me, memory and stubbornness. I went to the registry again and printed everything. The survey carried a stamp. Harrington and Blake, chartered surveyors. I thumbed the ink and something pricked my skin. The stamp looked too confident for a firm that dissolved years ago. I took notes and walked to the library. Mrs. Patel at the records desk had the kind of memory towns are born from. When I mentioned Harrington and Blake, she made a small sound of recognition and pity. Dissolved, dear. Years back. Why would anyone use that? She asked. The answer, as it turned out, was obvious. Forgery looks better with a respectable name. Whoever had drawn that line knew how to paint authority. Whoever had delivered the letter hoped I would be embarrassed or slow or elderly enough to fold. I began to build a little list of people who might help. Elliot Harrow, a surveyor who once helped me replace a rotten fence, agreed to look at the plan. He squinted at the ink and frowned. This isn't right, he said. Someone's used an old template and drawn a line that doesn't respect roots. Any judge would smell that in an instant, unless they build a case of long-term use. Long-term use. Possession through practice. The thin legal curtain behind which bullies hide and judges glance over. They wanted to make the strip look like it had been treated as theirs. They were attempting to manufacture time. I decided to test them. I invited Claire for tea with the precise, pleasant politeness of a woman who has spent a lifetime minding manners. Under the table, I set a stake, ceremonial and visible, a blunt wooden marker by the oak, like a protest and a dare. I set the battered camcorder in a pot of geraniums, The one my granddaughter had left behind after a christening years ago. It was grainy, but it recorded things people thought night hid. When I watched the footage later, my stomach dropped. There, by the hedge in the blue glow of a late streetlight, was a pale boot and the quick hands of someone pushing a thin white peg into the earth. The map's corner flapped in the night breeze. Someone was already walking my garden. They had started by walking where they had no right to walk. I had proof that they had been there. I felt something cold and fierce step into me. Not fear, not yet. The tiny, patient shape of a plan was assembling. I took the grainy camcorder frame to Elliot the next morning. He is a blunt man with the habit of measuring things to their bone. He examined the stamped survey, and then the video stills, and did what surveyors do. He measured and cross-checked. "Fake stationery often looks the part," he said, rubbing his chin. "But you can see the hand that drew that line didn't know where your oak drinks its water. They are counting on you not to dig." Mrs. Patel, who loves a mystery the way people love gossip, lent her CCTV tapes and a willingness to poke her nose where it wasn't welcome. The corner shop camera caught Daniel handing an envelope to a man in a van, and Claire later pressing a small peg into the soil. The envelope looked ordinary enough. The peg looked insignificant. Intent is often disguised as triviality. I called Elliot and asked him to produce a formal independent survey stamped with his name and date. I instructed him quietly to write it under a solicitor's cover letter, small legal, truth dressed in proper clothes. I wanted a professional record that would be impossible to mimic with forged paper. I also bought, under the pretense of monitoring foxes, a tiny GPS pet tag. Small, cheap, and curious, I pushed it into the shallow hole where the white peg had been. When the GPS came alive that night, my heart did not race. It kept time. The dot moved across my receiver. Someone had come back to steal evidence. They didn't know I had invited a camera to sit among the geraniums, or that I had stashed a blinking little watcher underground. They came in the dark, like thieves of confidence. Daniel crouched, hands quick, pocketing the hidden tag. Claire watched, torch in hand. They moved like conspirators who had practiced the script of small crimes and expected flickers of luck. They did not expect a woman who keeps old videotapes. I did not want a loud scene. I wanted a closing of options. I called my solicitor and Elliot and told them the simple truth. They were here, and we would not act like startled people blinded by outrage. We would move like a team that had already measured the terrain. Waiting in my life had taught me things the impatient do not learn. It taught me the joy of evidence accumulated and filed. It taught me the slow work of a life rebuilt into proof. That night, crouched behind the rhododendrons, I watched Daniel work and felt an old animal alertness ease into my bones. He pried at the soil, muttered under his breath. He fumbled with something and slipped the tagged item into his pocket. Claire moved like a woman who had rehearsed her lines a dozen times. She pressed another small peg into the ground and left as if nothing had happened. I did not call out. I could have shouted, but I was not a woman who needed the noise. I dialed Elliot and my solicitor instead. I switched on a floodlight that painted the oak and white theater and turned the garden into a stage. The camera showed them small in that box of light, stealing as if they were playing an ignoble game. Elliot appeared at my gate with a measured breath and a high-vis jacket that said authority, more decently than any courtroom. The solicitor arrived in a quieter car, face composed but nervous behind the practiced look of legal men. We let the Carters believe they had come and left with impunity. Let them believe their work had succeeded. Let them feel the comfort of a soft, unfinished theft. They would make the next mistake. And they did. When a solicitor from their side tried to negotiate under the floodlight, we walked him through the evidence with a kind of slow sanity that sounded like certainty. I handed over the ledger copies, the grainy camcorder frames, the CCTV stills. Elliot placed the independent survey on the damp grass. The solicitor's confident smile thinned. Then, calmly as dew, I called the police. The waiting worked as it had to. It allowed greed to grow bold and clumsy. Daniel bolted. He ran into the fog and hedgerows, and then into the maze of lanes beyond Highfield. Panic makes the best fugitives. Pilferers become clumsy when chased by light. Claire stayed, hands trembling. And the police found Daniel near the old canal bridge. The solicitor tried to bargain, to soften, to hand out promises that are cheaper than consequence. But paperwork is patient, and the law likes witness statements. The trap had not been violent. It had been meticulous. Greed had walked straight into a web it had not set. When the police car's blue light pooled at the hedge, I felt neither glee nor triumph. I felt a cool, collected satisfaction, the cleaning of a thing that had been stained for months. Elliot handed me the envelope his team had pulled from Daniel's pocket. A mess of photocopied surveys, a bank receipt from a shell company, a note with coordinates. The solicitor's practiced voice tried to smooth words into an excuse. I let the facts speak. We had everything. The camcorder that caught hands in the soil, the independent survey that showed the peg's fraudulent placement, the CCTV footage mapping the envelope delivery, and a paper trail that linked the payment for boundary facilitation to an account associated with the Carter's solicitor. We had context, timestamps, and the little white peg that looked so unimportant until you saw the hole it left. I stood in the rain-damp grass and named each piece of evidence aloud, one calm detail at a time. The solicitor's composure frayed. Claire wept. Daniel ran. The officers read their rights. I felt my hands go steady in the place where my husband used to hold them. The nice part, the part I have been taught to love in my bones, was the way other people's indifference folded back on itself. People assume old women cannot fight. People assume courtesy buys time and tells good lies. The law, when given breadcrumbs of fact rather than a passionate rant, is a fair place. It does not care about prettiness or apology. It cares about forms and dates and signatures. We did not shout. We presented. The police wrote notes. The solicitor backtracked. The Carter's plan, which had been built on the shape of stolen familiarity, unraveled into paperwork and poor excuses. When Daniel fled into the fog, he ran not from me but from consequence. That fact settled like rain on dry heather. It was not justice. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The rest would be quiet work. Statements, hearings, signatures. Watching Daniel's small, panicked face on the live CCTV feed a few days later, I felt the odd relief of a slow storm clearing. He had been found near the old canal bridge, shivering and small. The police brought him in for questioning, and the solicitor associated with the Carters found his office suddenly, a quiet place with few clients. Claire, when she sobbed about bills and failed businesses, made for the sort of human scene that tugs at one's better self. But there is a limit to pity when it is used as cover for theft. She had chosen to step across my hedge, with her hands full of plans and a hand on someone else's greed. Whether she was coerced or complicit no longer mattered to the ledger. The charges were not theatrical. Fraud, conspiracy to trespass, attempted misrepresentation, sterile titles for ugly things. The magistrate's office moved with a slow efficiency I had come to admire. My solicitor, practical and precise, told me to expect hearings, to keep notes, and to be ready to testify. "You did this carefully," he said once, tapping his pen. "You built a chain." We moved through paperwork like climbers moving through rope. I signed statements, supplied dates and screenshots, and sat while the Carter solicitor tried his worn tricks. Suggestion, obfuscation, hints that perhaps I had overinterpreted neighborly behavior. It was comical watching confidence dissolve into shaky sentences under oath. When the hearing started, The gallery filled with people who had been watching the story on local feeds. Some sympathetic, some curious. I spoke plainly. I told the court the times, the camera footage, the ledger details. The magistrate listened. A judge orders a preservation of land titles. Interim measures place the strip under temporary protection. There was no dramatic applause. There was only the measured truth of paper. The town, in its way, began to rearrange itself around the idea that you could not push an old woman off her memory and expect her to vanish quietly. Some neighbors brought baked goods and notes of apology. Others, who had been too polite to challenge the Carters earlier, came forward with photographs and observations that suddenly fit into the chain, and slowly, like water seeping under stone, the Carters' network began to twitch. Their solicitor's license came under inquiry. The shell company names matched files that legal teams could pierce when a judge nodded. Greed, it turned out, requires an audience. When the audience looks carefully, greed shows its hand. The courtroom smelled of varnish and old stories. I wore my husband's dark coat and tried to feel the solidity of him beside my shoulders. When my name was called, I stood and told the court the truth like a woman reading a ledger aloud. The camcorder, the GPS blip, the independent survey, the ledger copies, I placed them in order, each like a brick in a wall. Daniel took the stand, small and sheepish. He tried explanations that looked thin under cross-examination. Pressure of bills, bad advice. The solicitor did his best to construct a narrative of misunderstanding, but the magistrate's expression, patient and dry, did not soften for him. Evidence is not dramatic on film. It is inevitable. When judgment came, it was not fireworks. It was writing. The judge confirmed charitable provisional orders. Possession remained with me pending full inquiry. Charges of conspiracy and forgery would proceed. The solicitor who'd filed the false survey would be investigated for misconduct. The strip of ground was returned to me in all. Necessary paperwork while the wheels of accountability began grinding, slowly forward. Outside, the rain had stopped and pale sunlight sifted through clouds. A neighbor came over with a packet of garden cuttings and a note that said, "Simply well done." It felt absurdly small and enormous in the way the town's kindness is small and wide here. On the way back home, I walked the garden, fingers brushing the oak's rough bark. There is no revenge that mends everything. There is no victory that undoes sleepless months. But there is something like a rightness when truth sits where a lie was planted. Months later, the criminal process continued in slow, legal turns. The solicitor's career foundered. Claire moved away. Daniel took a sentence in community service, and the shell company's accounts were frozen pending restitution efforts. The civil suit returned some measure of money to my account, but money never replaces the hours you spend awake with worry. The village, which had watched at first with the cruel appetite of those who enjoy a scandal, softened into admiration, and then into ordinary neighborliness. People brought jars of chutney and unexpected bouquets. A teenage girl from the bakery left a note. "You're a legend." I laughed, then cried in the garden, and my granddaughter tied daisies in my hair as if we were in any simple summer. I took on a small role advising at the community center about elderly rights and property protection. They asked me because they had seen that a polite petition can be an old woman's trap if no one looks. I did it because I wanted to spare someone else the months of small terror that had been my life. I still sit on the bench my husband made. I still watch the sunlight fall across the oak. The scars of the months remain. Trust has a different shape. A brittle thing, but the house is mine. The roses bloom. My granddaughter's footprints press the paths where the Carters once paced. There are nights I wake with a quickness in my chest. Old adrenaline I thought had softened long ago. Then I breathe and remember. I kept the ground where my husband's laugh is still held in the tree's knot. And I kept the place where my granddaughter will sit and trace his initials. That, in the end, is what matters. The law restored what paper can restore. The town repaired what neighborliness can repair. I did not choose revenge for the spectacle. I chose it to protect memory and to make sure no smiling pair of strangers could walk in and tidy away someone's life because they thought an old woman would not look. If someone asks me whether I am sorry I acted, I shake my head. There is no regret in choosing to fix what was broken. There is only the quiet pleasure of the garden at dusk, the long ordinary hours that I can spend in peace, knowing I've fought and won the right to keep what belongs to me.